Every technology wave creates winners and losers, but this one is different because the asset on the line this time isn't just money. It's your identity and your family's future leverage. In this episode, I sit down with journalist, author, and chairman of the Advanced AI Society, Michael J. Casey, to trace how we went from a dollar hegemony and Facebook's algorithmic chokehold on news to Bitcoin as an unstoppable system, now to a world where autonomous AI agents are trading value on open rails while a handful of platforms quietly capture the infrastructure underneath and all around them. We unpack why he believes data ownership is a human right, what proof of control actually means, and why decentralized compute, storage, zero-knowledge proofs, and self-sovereign identity are about to become a core investment class for families who care about generational wealth, human agency, and escaping the techno-feudal attention economy to move into a true intention economy. So if you manage capital directly or as an advisor on behalf of your clients, you build companies, or you just refuse to let your lineage become fuel for someone else's algorithm, this conversation is a roadmap for where to deploy your time, money, and influence in the AI age. It's time to go to the atomic level.
It's time to go to the atomic level. It's time to go.
Welcome to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth, one insightful conversation at a time, so that you can grow and protect your net worth and net happiness. I'm J Snook, and today I'm joined by a guy I've known for, almost a decade, and I'm really excited to have Michael Casey come on the show. Michael, it's great to see you again. We have a lot to unpack. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Great to see you again.
So you wrote a book. We're going to talk about a lot of things today, and we're going to kind of do this theme that I've been working on as it relates to the AI side, the exponential side, all the things that are happening right now. Many people are just feeling like they're along for a crazy ride, or maybe they're even ignoring it. But we're going to unpack that and try and calm it down so people can speed up and participate in what you call reclaiming our liberty, our humanity, and our dignity in the digital age, which I think is a phenomenal subtitle. And if you haven't checked out the book, we'll make sure you have it in the show notes. But Our Biggest Fight was your most recent book. You've written several. Yeah. So for those who are not yet familiar with your kind of career arc and the contributions you've made, just talk to us a little about where did you come from? Give us some context and background on, how you grew up, when you kind of became this entrepreneurial or media journalism, dynamo, and then the work you're doing now. Like, how did it all evolve, and what led you to the place you are right now?
Oh, yeah, it's a pretty long, winding path. So how much time we got here, Chris? But I grew up in a place called Perth, Western Australia, which is like way out on the west coast of Australia. And until a few years ago, we were all led to believe that it was the most isolated capital city in the world, meaning, a state capital. It was like about as far away from Jakarta, Indonesia, as it was from Adelaide in South Australia. But then I discovered, in fact, there's an American city that has that title, and no process for guessing, but it's actually Honolulu. Nonetheless, Perth feels like this very isolated place, right? It feels like it's on the edge of everything. And I kind of grew up itching to get out of there. I felt like it was a claustrophobic kind of environment to some extent. It was a good childhood, but it was one that, as I got older, I wanted to, like lots of people of my generation, just hit the world and travel. And I eventually did, quitting a job that I absolutely hated. I was working as an accountant, which usually makes people laugh if they know me and imagine me as an accountant. It feels like some sort of bizarro combination there. But it really wasn't. So I ended up variety of things, but teaching English as like a 21-year-old in Thailand. And that just blew my mind, opened my mind to a whole different way of seeing the world, taught myself Thai, lived there for a year, and just then decided I wanted to become a journalist because there was just all these stories I wanted to tell. So basically that began a career in journalism. I went back to Perth and landed a job after a graduate diploma in journalism at the West Australian, a local newspaper there. I was fascinated in the emergence of Asia as an economic power at that time. So I then went back, came to the States, did a master's at Cornell in Asian studies, in the strangest place in the world to study Southeast Asia. I was right in the frigid, bottom of Cayuga Lake. Beautiful town though, and then that's sort of led me to the States. Met my girlfriend, now wife, and then went back to Australia. She followed me. We did a couple of years as the chief correspondent in Indonesia at the moment when the Suharto regime was in the midst of its collapse, which was fascinating. But then she dragged me back to New York, spent 6 years with Dow Jones Newswires, fascinating time as the emergence of the internet at in the late 90s. That got me very interested in digital technologies and how they are transformative of systems. And that's always been a kind of a theme that I've gotten into. I have a kind of an internationalist global view that came from my travel, but I also have a sort of a way of looking at the world, I think, that's societal and systemic rather than sort of linear and direct. And so I got very interested in the internet because that's what it was, this open platform, this open connective system. And I could see it disrupting markets and disrupting finance. And I was writing about that and won some awards. And anyway, that was it. We ended up going to Argentina for 6 years, so my wife could do a PhD in anthropology, and that led me down a different path because I ended up writing about debt and currencies and Argentina's perennial problems with that, and got very interested in the political economy of what makes a currency work and what doesn't, and got fascinated by institutional problems of trust and institutional problems of central banking, and then got dragged back to the States in 2009, back to New York, where there was an even bigger one than the financial crisis that Argentina had been through. And it was the global one, of course. And then around that same time, I started writing books. My first book was about a book called Che Guevara. A book called Che's Afterlife, which was about the image of Che Guevara. So really the one weird outlier book that I wrote. Most of my books were kind of about finance and digital technology, but that this was about a global phenomenon, an image that went wild. And in some respects, now I look back and think that, in fact, I look at meme culture and everything else that we think about the crypto world. It actually was.
You were a foreteller of essentially mimetic warfare. I mean, it's an interesting. Now that makes total sense in your arc, and maybe at the time it felt like an outlier, but it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I look back at that book and go, yeah, now I know why I wrote that book. I mean, I mainly wrote that book because it was such fun, right? I was not like a hardcore lefty or a hardcore righty on this issue. I wasn't pro Che, pro Cuba, pro Miami, pro anything. I just thought it was fascinating that this one image, this famous photo taken by Alberto Corda in 1961, just went everywhere around the world. And mainly because I'd done a lot of traveling, right? I traveled all around Latin America and Southeast Asia, and you name it. And I would see Che's image pop up on the mud flaps of a tuk-tuk in Thailand with Rambo on one side, Che on the other, right? It was just everywhere. And it was this global capitalist phenomenon. And I was like, how on earth did this communist icon, this guy, so it just became this really interesting exploration. And I traveled around Latin America. I went to Bolivia where he was killed. And it was by far the most fun book I've ever done. And to this day, that's what I want to eventually, when everything calms down, get back to, where I just travel and write a book about something I find fascinating for the hell of it. It was the best-selling book, but it was also the best reviewed. I got it basically really helped me because Michiko Kakutani, who was the New York Times reviewer, the lead New York Times reviewer, and notoriously tough, loved my book, and she made it one of her top picks of the year. And that just meant that then I could go and sell other books, basically, because editors at publishing houses thought, oh my God, Michiko Kakutani, how did you do that? So anyway, but coming back to New York 2009, the global financial crisis, I got very interested in, these broad problems of money. The dollar's hegemony was a big issue at the time for me. I thought that was a creator of all these global imbalances that was sort of like the IMF and others were obsessed about. And I wanted to look at that. So I wrote a book called The Unfair Trade that looked at the sort of the massive ways in which people's lives were getting caught up in these big shifts in deficits and surpluses and everything else. But it was also around that time, the midst of the euro crisis was on, and in Cyprus, there was a run on the banks after there was a 10% tax imposed on withdrawals. And this little thing called Bitcoin suddenly launched into my attention. Smarter people had been following it a lot earlier than me. But in 2019, I was like, what the hell is this thing? And I wrote a rather ordinary column trying to explain it because, of course, I didn't have a clue. But it was interesting to me. And I got a phone call from The folks from Jeremy Allaire's at that point rather stealth company. I think it was, I'm not sure it was yet called Circle, but it was on the verge of being launched as Circle. And a few of us journalists went out for dinner with him and Barry Silbert and Mickey Malker and Jim Breyer and Raj Date, who'd been the former head of the CFPB. And I was like, my God, these smart, like accomplished investors and former government officials and others are all into this thing. What is it? And somebody at that dinner explained to me that all of the stuff I've been obsessed with about Argentina, how it had this institutional breakdown because you had to trust these human institutions to try to stand up the integrity of not just the money, but also their political commitments. What if that money was actually run by an algorithm that could not be stopped, that this was an unstoppable system? And therefore the institutional risk would be removed. And I just went, and to this day, I mean, I still think Bitcoin is one of the most amazing inventions of all time. And I think it's such a pity that people don't understand why it's interesting. And I think after being in that community now for quite a while, I definitely wouldn't want to call myself a Bitcoin maxi, and I'm not an obsessive about it, but it is an incredible invention, and the unstoppable nature of it is actually that's what it is. Like, it doesn't even matter, is it money, is it digital gold, is it whatever, it's an unstoppable machine. And the fact that we've created that that no single person can step in and intervene in the rule set by which a whole lot of code is being transferred and moved around, and a lot of value is being moved around, with all those risks at stake, that it continues, that's incredible, right? And so I think that then led me down, obviously, a huge rabbit hole. I started writing a column with Paul Vigna at the Journal. So at this stage, I'm at the Wall Street Journal. I hadn't made that clear. I've been there for a while, but I was writing a daily column about global economics and currencies and stuff like that, and run a few teams there and so forth. And so, and by the way, this gets to where we end up with this book, because at that stage of my life, not only am I incredibly busy because the financial crisis was a problem for a lot of people, but it was also an enormous task for journalists, right? We were working like dogs at the time, but we were doing podcasts and we were doing tweets, and I was actually doing live TV. There was a new WSJ Live that I was one of the anchors on. So, and I was writing a blog and I was writing a column, and I was doing and I was realizing that we're on this treadmill, and we'd been in journalism excitedly looking at the emergence of the internet and thinking, this is a thing that was, it'll get our word out there, and we might have to compete with these citizen bloggers and citizen journalists and things like that, but it's probably a good thing because it's opening up the surface of contributions, and everybody has access, everyone can be a journalist, and that's not a bad thing, and we're all compete on our own terms. And so I was okay with the fact that journalism was being challenged by all these different newcomers. But at that moment, I realized that wasn't the competition, that the competition was Facebook's algorithm, that everyone, whether we were at the Wall Street Journal or a single Substack, there wasn't a big Substack at the time, but a single blogger, we had to keep their algorithm happy. And they had our audience, not us. We did not have a voice to our audience. And that was like this huge revelation at the same time that I was getting into Bitcoin. And so I was starting to see these sort of centralized systems and these centralized controls being what they were. Ended up writing a book about Bitcoin. Paul and I were basically the first mainstream journalists to write regularly about Bitcoin. And so we had a little column called BitBeat. We were like amongst the nerdy Bitcoiners of the world. We were kind of like these cult figures, because we sort of put it into the Wall Street Journal. And then we wrote our book, The Age of Cryptocurrency. By that stage, I was so interested in it. And by that stage, also not just interested in Bitcoin, but this blockchain idea that there was a whole lot of. I'd met Vitalik right when he came out and stupidly never wrote about it. One of my great regrets that I never wrote the big seminal, who is this 21-year-old whiz kid kind of story. I'd met him at the North American Bitcoin conference in early 2014, and sort of saw all this potential for a system that would be run on on, you know, an unstoppable machine, a smart contract based driven world. And you know, as a result, quit my job, went to MIT Media Lab, where I was one of the first staffers hired for the digital currency initiative, which was really cool because I was in the Media Lab, which was cutting edge research place. I think I met you around that time.
Yeah, I was trying to remember. I think we met. Well, I know we met in Boston because I was out there for I don't remember which event it was, but there was a big crypto event out there, and we met at one of the cocktail parties. You were the book had been out. I think Age of Cryptocurrency was out at that point. So that
it came out before I left the journal. So yeah.
So we met there for the first time, and then, you know, connected several times since over the years. You went to CoinDesk soon thereafter, if I remember right. Or
it was about 4 years after that. Yeah, I wrote 2 more books in the middle of it because this was then, so we ended up writing a 5th book. So the 4th book was so we wrote the Age of Cryptocurrency, then I wrote Unfair Trade. Then my 4th book was a book called The Social Organism. I met a guy called Oliver Luckett, and the 2 of us wrote this book about social media. It was a lot more optimistic, but it was then ultimately my view, and certainly much more optimistic and positive than what I ended up writing for our biggest fight. But nonetheless, it was looking at the problems of algorithmic centrality as well. It was more about like the power, just the sort of the phenomenon of social media. And that was called The Social Organism. And then ultimately wrote the book called The Truth Machine, which was a much sort of deeper and broader look at blockchain. And so that was also with Paul. But around shortly after that, I got hired. I was an advisor to CoinDesk for a number of years. I was very involved in the consensus events, but then in 2019 sort of decided to go all in and became the chief content officer at CoinDesk, and we really ramped up the team. I brought on, you know, very high-level professional journalists to run that, and guys like Kevin Reynolds, who was the editor-in-chief there, and was a very successful Bloomberg editor for many, many years. Emily Parker, who was at the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. Joanne Poe, who was at the Journal and CNBC and Fox Digital. You know, we had a lot of we just turned it into a professional newsroom. And that, of course, was great. It was hard to. It was great to start with. The first few couple of years was the go-go years of Bitcoin pushing through, you know, new record highs in that period, the DeFi summer and all of that stuff. You know, we grew consensus. It was also the pandemic, and so we had to start off doing online consensus, and then we ended up getting it to 20,000 people in Austin coming out after the pandemic in 2002. But that was also the moment when crypto winter started hitting hard.
Right. Yeah. 2022 was like the peak and the trough all at the same time from an event standpoint, right?
Oh yeah, no, it was huge. That was like, because it was all the, you know, the marketing spend that you get from all the, you know, the Bitcoin, all the crypto companies, that it's lagged, right? They were coming out of the end of 21 with the money, you know, that they just had to spend. And so consensus was a huge success, but it was also the moment I'll never forget. We were so happy with that event. It was a very, very successful coming out after the pandemic. And then we had a sort of a celebratory staff party the night afterwards, the final night. And I remember waking up in the morning, you know, a little groggy, and reaching over to my phone as one does, and seeing the first kind of CoinDesk flash headline that came up, and it was Celsius has suspended withdrawals.
Yeah, right.
It was that moment when you realized contagion was going big now, and then that's it. Everything one thing led to another. It all fell apart in the market. DCG, which was our owner, when it had a lot of trouble, right? Genesis lost $1 billion. We broke the first story of that, which was a hard thing to do as the newsroom owned by the company that we were reporting on. And then, of course, we broke the biggest story of them all, which was the balance sheet of FTX. And that was this sort of watershed moment, both for us as a news organization. I think I still say it was the finest moment in my journalism career, although I had little to do with it, other than the fact that I hired a few people who put it all together. But Ian Allison's big scoop really moved the world, and they won prize after prize for that. The Loeb Award, which is the highest, it's the Pulitzer really for business journalism. So that was a sort of a huge shining moment in journalism, and I think we put crypto, serious crypto news in on the map. But it also was the end, because the business was still completely caught up, and it was so dependent on the money flow of the crypto bubble. That's where the marketing spend was, and so the story that rose us to these new heights was also the one that sort of dragged the business into the mire. So yeah, they ended up, DCG had to put us on the block, and after a torturous process of trying to find a buyer and a few interesting players that came along, it was swooped up by Bullish, which is an institutional exchange, and they changed things. So we moved on. C-suite was, so I was the chief content officer. A bunch of us were all, the CEO was moved on. We were all moved on. And that's it. So Consensus is still going strong. It's still a great event. I think the news sites changed a lot, but it was the end of an era. And so that was it. I want
to pause there, but I want to poke in a thing contextually, because I think you're one of the most interesting persons out there that I could have this conversation with, what I'm about to say, because tying a couple of these early threads together, and your global background kind of up to that, I think gives people a real sense of the perspective that you've shaped, your kind of internal perspective on everything. But you mentioned about the competition. You realized there was this watershed moment early on, maybe it was 09, 010, as somewhere in there, where you realized the competition was not other newsrooms, it wasn't independent journalists, it was the algorithm at Facebook, and by proxy, anything that came after it. And that was kind of one of those scary ahas, because at that moment you realized that the incentives had now shifted to a thing that could become potentially very negative, right? It could become a thing that feeds itself. So I don't want to give you the answers. I want to say, I think that's something I want to call out for the listener as a nugget that needs to be into this thread of conversation. So there was that awareness. Then at the same time, about 5, 6, 7 years later, you get this unstoppable kind of awareness around a thing called Bitcoin protocols, right? These open source protocols, Bitcoin being the one that you referenced, and how they become an unstoppable system. Mm-hmm. So now you have this unstoppable system, but then you have the people telling the stories around that. So your frontline view is both at the journal, call it traditional media, then moving into and through call it alternative or crypto media at the highest level, becoming part of CoinDesk, running content there. And the journalistic integrity that you brought to, and this is my opinion, as an onlooker and someone who's had the privilege of having a couple conversations, I want to hear how you feel about the journalistic integrity. But again, you just gave us a story where you kind of covered the story that also killed a business, right? Yeah. And you broke those things. And so there's a journalistic integrity thread into the work, both probably through the books and in a way that you look at it. It may be different than somebody else does. And so here's the nugget that I want you to just kind of put in your head as you keep talking. Infrastructure capture is a thing. And you were also very outspoken about the Epstein files being released and other things. And I don't want to necessarily go down that rabbit hole. I just want to tie these threads together for people, because infrastructure capture is what you can do when you can't stop a system. You can stop the on-ramps and off-ramps, or you can at least control the on-ramps and off-ramps. And there's more that'll be coming out, and there's things like that. But when we think about these unstoppable systems, now we have an open source moment, right? Which in AI, right, with this last week. So we've had this Claude bot, this open source moment of OpenClaw and all this stuff that now is, permeating the newsreels and Twitter and X and everything. And it's a signal of how fast and what is to come, even if it's not all, exactly as it was originally reported. My point is these unstoppable protocols still face friction when it comes to the on and off ramps to our conscious awareness. And so I want you, as a journalistic, hero, and also as a concerned citizen, which was kind of leading into the book, to not to frame it in through that, because I think you just have such a unique perspective on that.
Yeah, really good way to think about it. Infrastructure capture, yeah, it's a very, very real problem. I'll put it in these terms, right? So I think where we had for some time journalism that could persist on the previous infrastructure, right? Even like analog infrastructure, where it's print news, and there was a proliferation of newspapers and proliferation of competing, news TV channels. Yes, there was always bias. Yes, there was always a certain amount of influence. But the cynical view of journalists I never share, because I know them and I know the profession, and therefore I always felt that world did well enough. It was always under attack, but it did well enough to maintain an independence, because there was enough money coming in through advertising and whatever else, and it was sufficiently built with a church and state wall between the ad and the business side of the operation and the news business. And there was this generalized acceptance that if you did good journalism, then your reputation would rise, and so would your news organization. And so the incentive to not be biased, as much as you can never eradicate all bias, was there to keep things in balance, right? The problem with things that happen afterwards, with this emergence of the algorithm, is that the business itself became clicks and likes, right? And it had to be. This isn't because people these journalists, they're just chasing clicks. But no, that literally was the business, right? Advertising became programmatic. Advertising became not something that the business guys over in the separated church and state difference room of the news organization would go up and sign an independent deal between the New York Times and this guy. No, it was the Times is a better place than others to do it. But like any medium-sized news organization was beholden to programmatic ads, which was determined on how much flow and copy you were getting read and how many eyeballs. And because it was constantly leaking, because you didn't have the audience anymore, Facebook had the audience, you had to feed that damn algorithm. And Google was just as bad, of course, because there you faced and you would know all about this, the perennial problem of the three letters that I think every newsroom should hate more than anything else, which is SEO, right? Search engine optimization. If you break down what that's saying, is an absolute abomination. The idea that I need to write my headline and choose my content and choose my words so that the search engine, that Google's algorithm is constantly changing on you, by the way. There is no set fast rules on this. Has to be, and you're constantly trying to keep up with it. Then who are you serving? What are you writing for? And yet you have to, because that's where the money is, right? So when there are just one or two big platforms, so when we sit here and we sort of throw bombs at journalists and say, oh, you're all biased and this and everything, it's like, think about the actual economic infrastructure of what this thing is working for. There is no such thing as a neutral town square platform. These things are all biased. And you can have a bunch of conservative or liberal theories about what that is. The bias is, where is the money coming from the actual shareholders of those platforms for the advertisers that have got no interest whatsoever in what you're writing, right? So that is going to create bias, not necessarily in what you write, but by surfacing the particular feeds that you will read. Because it's reading you, it's understanding your habits, it's getting into your adrenal gland to give you the dopamine hit that it knows from your behavior you are going to do. There is no free choice in this. This is not free speech. This is a completely manipulated system. That is what the next book became. That's what our biggest fight became. That is the actual abuse. That is a feudalist system. That is controlling your mind. And the next phase of my life, after writing that book with Frank McCourt that happened in the midst of all of that kerfuffle at CoinDesk, was AI, because I came out and saw AI, and look, let's just get back to Bitcoin, to throw it in there, because it was not just Bitcoin, obviously it was blockchains. The core idea was that as a decentralized system, where and this is the message in our biggest fight, the book you've referenced, right? It is that you own the data, because it was clear by that stage, well into the 2024 as it was then, that the most important commodity of our economic age was data. It was everything. And that is what Google and Facebook and Twitter and all these others controlled. And that is where you had lost your free will and your control, that we were now pawns in this system because we didn't own our data. And our position in our book is that your data is a human right. Now, the thing that is really interesting about AI is that it can go both ways. So basically, when I left CoinDesk, what am I going to do next? Well, AI is the big thing, generative AI, it's out there. And it occurred to me that this is actually, we've tried and we've screamed from the rafters and we've tried to get people to pay attention to the need for privacy, the need for data control, the need for decentralized blockchain type models. And I suddenly went, this is the use case. And the reason is because in many respects, the sort of like agentic AI vision that people have, where my agent that's, you know, running on Anthropic, and yours, which is running on, you know, OpenAI, and the data is in one place is in Google Cloud and the other one's over in AWS, and they've got different environments. How on earth are they going to actually communicate and trade information and trade value with each other without a decentralized ledger keeping system underneath it? Which one is Google Cloud going to manage this, or is Anthropic? Well, that's where you get the competitive challenges, right? So all of a sudden, there's a need for decentralized open protocols to enable this thing to happen. We have a rare little moment to jump in there, but we need to do a lot of things to actually ensure that even as some of these open protocols get created and enabled, it's interesting, Google, Anthropic, they're all building these open systems to try to allow this communication layer to happen between agents. Even as that happens, there's so much that still needs to happen around control of your data, around rights, around, and so this is basically what I've been doing the last 2 years. I've created something that's called the Advanced AI Society, and we are pushing for what we call proof of control. And it's our thesis that the technologies that have emerged largely out of the Web3 blockchain world, but they also come out of cryptography and privacy tech and self-sovereign identity and a variety of other things. That stack of technologies is actually going to be fundamental to the ability to appropriately scale AI in a way that delivers shared prosperity and all the promises that we hear from it. And the reason is that all these institutional organizations that we still deal with, all the companies that like rule our world, they're gonna realize that they have lost control. And board members and compliance officers and again, wait a second, guys, you're going to take this agent and push it out in the wild, which is why this malt book thing this past weekend was wild, right? Because it sort of demonstrated how dangerous and risky it all is.
Well, and it also, like, for me, and again, I want to keep you flowing here, but like it was the no, not yet, right? It was kind of like, we're not yet, we're not ready, we're nowhere near ready. And once, 100%. And so what you have, for those who are still trying to keep up or don't even know what the heck we're talking about yet,
sorry,
AI agents, AI agents basically formed a social network of their own called Maltbook, and began to theoretically, and whether it was scripted or not, there's enough of it going on. And as the days unfold here, and I'm tracking it as you are, there's not necessarily sentience yet, but you do have now multiple protocols and major developers. Jeff Garcic publishing stuff like to try and patch things to make it more secure. There's all kinds of vulnerabilities. It did a 2 out of 100 on a cyber secure level. So this is like stuff that is very risky to expose your data. But what people are seeing is not only are there agents creating and setting up their own Bitcoin wallets, Bitcoin nodes, and Lightning nodes, they're starting to transact with one another. When you think about that, imagine you put something out in the wild. So imagine you invent something and it has your keys and wallet. You no longer have it. It shuts you out, and it's now got the ability to transact with other bots. And we are doing that, which is the promise that you're talking about. We need a blockchain ledger type system. We need a globally distributed, unstoppable, incorruptible protocol like Bitcoin. But once AI agents are using that very thing to transact with each other, we're out of the loop. And there's nothing you're going to do now to stop it or control it. So then the infrastructure capture becomes the power plants and the ability to keep the data centers running. And those are now obviously multi-trillion-dollar investments. And so again, tying this together, what we're really talking about, and the challenge that for some reason you're crazy enough to take on, which I applaud you for, because I've been in the fight in my own humble little way, trying for the last 5 years since I saw things I can't unsee to attack it and try and be contributory without making it worse. And that's the challenge is, how do you make a contribution to the ethical conversation, to the educational conversation, to the leadership empowerment? Hey, you guys have to care. You don't care about your data because you don't think you're doing anything. You don't get the conversation. This is bigger than you, but you can play a role. And if you don't, we're done.
Okay, so this is where I'll jump in. I've got a message for your specific audience, right?
Yeah.
And this I had a revelation. I was in that horrible place, Davos, like 2 weeks ago. It's a crazy elitist sort of gathering, but it's a good place to have the kind of conversations that I had, those particular ones. So I spoke to a guy who is a VC, and we were talking to him about our idea. So Advanced AI Society is trying to get the word out that there is this new category of technologies that we call proof of control. And it involves, decentralized compute, right? This is the idea that your compute can be anywhere and you can buy it across a network. It's not, so you don't have to rely on one particular owner of that compute, which it also means owning your data. You have decentralized storage like Filecoin. We have Hedera, which is a member, which has verifiable models, and so you can trace where the inputs and outputs are within that model. We have verified privacy, confidential compute. All these things are part of this stack of technologies that are going to be very, very important for not just companies, but for individuals to know that they not only have control over their AI and their data, but they have proof of it. Anyway, we're talking about this as a new category, and I was talking to this VC and said, look, how can we help? How could we be helpful to reach out to your portfolio companies? And he said, that's helpful, but the biggest help you could do for a VC is to help me formulate the story with the family offices who are our LPs. And the reason why that's important, he said, is because family offices, people who are looking after generational wealth, need to look at what this means for their kids. Right? So if you're trying to invest in a world that is going to preserve that family generational wealth and opportunity, you're obviously talking not just about the pool of money, but the world in which that wealth is going to be in. You want for your kids' sake, to ensure that this AI economy that's emerging is one in which they have control, right? So we actually came up with this guy, and we're like, all right, this is really interesting. Not only is proof of control a concept that we think of as a category of technology, it actually has to become a new investment class. It has to be the antidote, the absolutely essential kind of ballast to everything else that's happening in AI. It's going to be an integral part of what the AI economy is. So I think, it is moral, because the event that we alluded to at the beginning that's coming up on February 23rd, it's the Silverado Report, the resort in Napa. It's in conjunction with Linux, which is holding its Linux Members Summit, and they're having a big conversation around agentic AI there, because the Agentic AI Foundation with Google and AWS and Anthropic and all those guys, that's happening at the summit. The day before our event, we call it Human Authorized, the Summit on Human Agency, is about how do we just wait before you have that big conversation around, AI agentic protocols. Stop. How do we establish authority for human beings in this? And that matters for the individual, but it matters for a company. So that I know that, company, employee B in division, whatever, that is the department that's responsible for delegating an AI to do a particular job, has that authority, is a human being, and is provably connected to the company and the that chain of command needs to have this base human anchor. And so the technologies that we're talking about, really developing at this summit are a stack of proof of control technologies, but also this new idea around decentralized credentials. I have a credential that proves that I'm a human, and another credential that proves I'm connected to these other people, and I control the social graph, which gets us right back to Facebook and everything else. Like Facebook controlled our social graph. This is a model in which you have the permissions, and companies are going to form around these ideas. That each of us share a common set of permissions as to what we will share or not. That's how we create authority, right? That is going to be the base layer, we think.
And
So
I think you brought up a very important entry point that, again, the audience of a high net worth individual or family listening to this, or a lot of the RIAs, the advisors that focus on empowering, that may otherwise, like, you know, this tunes them out, right? Like, oh, Bitcoin or AI, it's just too much. Like, I you know, it's not my world. It's like, well, yes, it is your world. When you want to play a role in the future of your clients and your children's grandchildren, the most fundamental conversation that you have to find a way to be helpful and useful in is directing capital to something other than just the top line ROI. And you know, and I heard you say, you know, I've called it before, there's other kinds of ROI. There's the return on influence, there's the risk of inactivity. And I think you're touching in on both of those when you're saying we have to educate the LP stack, or the VC that was telling you this a couple weeks ago. We have to educate our C stack or LP stack, because the LPs that are in that, especially if they're family offices or if they're multi-generational, you know, just figuring out how to do more than just retire, right? And actually how to pass on some of what they've spent their life working on. At any small level, whether it's through donor advised funds, which we had an episode on a couple days ago with Lucas Dewelly of Donors Trust, there are these mechanisms where they could really think of philanthropy as free speech, which was the episode that dropped yesterday, and use these mechanisms like donor advised funds to make it easier to turnkey a solution where someone could say, you know what, a portion of what I need and want to do, not just for my family, but for others like it, is got to go into advanced AI society type efforts, whether that be a downstream of social benefit corporations or whatever. But the incentive model, just like we talk about with the algo, has to change. It has to become an asset class worth preserving. Data is the ultimate asset. And we have got to stop feeding the other side of the coin, which we have over-indexed on. And I've always said it, and then I'll let you kind of keep going on this. We spent the last 15 years purchasing unregulated oil wells and putting them in every aspect of our home. Whether it's the Ring doorbell that harvests our front-end data, and that, whether it's the Alexa that listens to everything we say so that it knows when we're talking at it and feeds us advertising in our Prime shopping cart based on the arguments we had with our kids or our spouse, or based on the questions we asked it and the music we asked it to play, or whether it's the Nest that reads, you know, our preferred temperature in between our kitchen and our living and our bedroom, and feeds it back to a centralized data hub, or whether it's the thing that we track ourselves with that may as well be under our skin because we don't have choice. We have an Apple ID or we have a Gmail ID tapping into every aspect of our life, from our acceleration in our car to our words being spoken to everything else. Like these $1,400 to $2,000 things that we make the best sellers of the year every Christmas have basically been unleashed, unlicensed oil wells. And we've fed this beast, and now we're putting AI on top of it, which can do things faster than we can even keep up with. We have got to change our incentive model. And the way to do that is to tell this story of, no matter how much money you have, nobody wants to live in a mansion surrounded by AK-47s fighting robots and other humans who are starving to death. And if you want to be house pets in a park, laughing like dogs at the beach and having a great time, and you want that to be your grandkid's story, who cares who their overlord is? That future requires us to care now about what you're talking about, and to put our money where our mouth is.
Great, love it. Really is a fantastic call to action. Let me put an even more optimistic take on it, right?
Yes, and I think I just went dark, so you can go light.
A lot of time we spend here, and it's rightful to do so, to warn of the risks, and therefore to say we need to do X, because if we don't, like, we've got this dystopian future in our midst. And so, you know, how do we stop that? And that's a hard thing to motivate people around. I mean, fear does motivate people, but it doesn't always drive people to make the most sensible decisions.
Or
I think
right? They feel powerless.
paralyzed. Yeah, it can be as well. Yeah, 100%. So I think that the way I look at it is just imagine the wealth creation on a global scale, right? Of which we will all partake, and it is. I'm not talking about some sort of communist distributed system. We're talking about a competitive environment where the best and the smartest can still rise to the top. If and when the rights to that data are shared with everybody, and the reason I say this, the reason I say this would be the biggest wealth creation, innovation explosion the world has ever seen, is because I look at the history of property rights. If you go back through history, and every time there was a transfer of a particular property right to a wider class of human being, you've seen these explosive moments of innovation and economic prosperity. So, perhaps the most important of all is the formation of the US Constitution, which enshrines property rights along very, very importantly with human rights, right? Individual rights, property rights, fundamental to the Constitution. You can go up and make what you want with your property. Now, all of that has been abused in the Web 2 world, because your property is your data, and now you're no longer. We've gone and created a feudal system, right? The American project was a pushback against the feudalism that essentially preceded it. This is the great liberal enlightenment moment. But there's other moments, right? The Magna Carta, the creation of the limited stock company in Amsterdam, the first time that you could spread ownership of these capital enterprises across everybody. That was this little country of Holland became this massive global colonial power because of the wealth that was unlocked in that environment. When Deng Xiaoping finally, after an internal struggle, took charge of the Chinese Communist Party in 1983, one of the first things he did is he said, everybody living in your home that is currently owned by the state, you now own that. People don't realize how powerful that was to kickstart the Chinese economic miracle, that people now own their home and they could do something with it. There's it's what you've got. I mean, I'm a huge fan, as I usually mention, of Hernando de Soto, who I've worked with over the years, very famously has written about property rights and their importance for years. And, he's looked at this and just like the reason why the Western world is wealthy and the developing world is not, is because we have trustable, relatively, comparatively more trustworthy systems of contract that give you property rights, right? So everywhere we've seen this has happened. It's because it unlocks the possible. We don't know what the possibility is when people have their assets and they can do something with it. So we now live at the moment where the most powerful, most transformative, most potentially positive technology ever invented is with us. And we can go either way. We can take this into a dystopian totalitarian nightmare, or we can allow everybody to partake with the commodity that is fundamental to that new technology's economy, your data, and you have control over it. And it will, by definition, unlock this collaborative, open, hive mind, capitalist explosion of ideas and innovation, and it will be shared according to that thing. So that is where we're going to have fantastic opportunities to make money, along with the ability to preserve the spirit of the American Revolution, the spirit of the Enlightenment, and bring us back to a world in which people have charge over their things. This is why I'm passionate about this stuff, Chris. This is why I'm doing.
I share your passion, and I share your conviction to try in whatever small way spread this good idea and remind people of the historical precedence of property rights and ownership in parallel to human rights, at a time where New York just elected someone who says you shouldn't be able to own property. Like these bad ideas that are spreading, the antidote to that is to shed light on the historical uplift that the broader set of humanities had because of these rights, and to then reframe that the world is now digital and never going backwards, and that this analog digital, this bits and atoms arbitrage that has now become systematic, like it's actually infrastructure now, is our biggest opportunity. It's actually not our biggest fight. Our biggest fight's against bad ideas and ignorance, but are in my opinion, but the biggest opportunity is what you just said. It doesn't require us to print money and hope there's someone to bail it out. Like, it's universal basic data dividends, not universal basic income. It's all these, kind of half-baked ideas, but with actual real hard commodity underneath it that never gets less valuable and never is the same size output. In other words, it grows exponentially, data, because our exhaust is going higher and higher with everything we invent, with every chip we reduce, with every innovation we make. The output becomes greater, and yet the value to refine that becomes greater. And so it's the only hard commodity on earth, data, that has essentially a limitless upside. And we now have the rails and the ledgers and the mechanisms to distribute that fairly and equitably, not because a human says, I think somebody should do, not because we're getting something we don't deserve, but because we're getting exactly what we deserve.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to put it. I will say this, that there's equal ignorance on the left and the right on this, right? So absolutely, the idea that you should not own anything, like the Mamdani kind of push here, I don't know that's quite what he's saying, but nevertheless, it is a very dangerous idea, because ultimately somebody always owns something, and it could be the state or it could be just the biggest guy in the world, and you will be a slave to that person, right? But the problem is that the right, and its sort of adulation of Silicon Valley and the sort of the titans who have made it, do not realize that it's exactly the same problem, albeit within a kind of a supposedly private model, right? Right. You are now a slave to those platforms that are owned by these guys. So either way, right? It is a system of servitude, and we do not create the right economy in that environment. And I think your point about, like, I mean, I'm not a fan of UBI at all. I get the idea that we have a problem potentially when AI advances to a point where people don't have jobs anymore, and we need people to be around, right? But I think that we need to learn again from the model of the American project, and just to say, well, everybody should have an equal chance to participate and contribute to the that machine, right, in some way. And if it's all controlled, if all the data is controlled by Microsoft, then they will just be the only ones extracting the real value, along with the other ones from, not just to call out Microsoft, from the AI economy. But if all of us are able to be rightfully rewarded for the data, for the content, for everything that we produce, and not have it just sucked up and turned against us, then we have our own capacity to participate in that economy on the terms by which, as you put it, we deserve. And that is a much healthier, constructive way to bring everybody into the mix than just to say, we're going to carve a little piece off the top and just hand out crumbs to you so that you can still have a house and have enough to.
The things that you've learned, because I share everything you just said, I align with personally, whether we're right or wrong. I think this is not a left or right issue. This is a politically agnostic issue. This is you understand what's going on and what can be done about it, or you don't, and you could make bad decisions or pass bad ideas by being ignorant. So the responsibility and it is to not politicize this. It is to fundamentally go, we have this thing that is essentially like a mineral, right? If we all understand mineral rights. There's oil under the ground. It's not valuable under the ground, but it has potential under the ground. Well, similarly, there's data, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, and it's everywhere. Now, right now, we've created these handful, the Mag 7, and the way that we've benefited from them is if you were invested in the market, which 90 some odd % of the people are not, but if you were invested in the market, then you benefited by proxy on the growth of the 7 companies that make up the majority of the S&P 500 returns. But if you were not invested in the market, you are fundamentally poorer, and yet you are contributing as much with your data exhaust, walking around with your phone in your pocket, as everyone else. And so you're not even able to access your pro rata piece. What we're talking about is a world where you could access at least your pro rata piece and have privacy to boot. You could have a decentralized ID. You could use that as your access point. If you wanted to share that data with any number of companies, then there'd be a way for you either by default or by opt-in to do so and receive some kind of tokenized remuneration, micropayments for that contribution. And you don't have to own stock in anything. You could just keep walking around, talking on your phone or playing your games.
And look, that may be the utopian future we end up with, right? You can just do what you want, but you'll be a participant. You'll be a contributor. You're giving data. You're giving. Look, I mean, we are all part of this big grand experiment, and if we're all contributing, then we should be able to be rewarded for it. Like the other part of it is compute, right? Compute is the So there's. It's interesting. Like we talk about the commodities. One is data, which is it's not really a commodity, but it is. The analogy works, right? It's this really important base layer. The other piece of it is the compute, and the compute rolls down into silicon, which is also dependent upon a bunch of rare minerals, and of course energy, right? But so we tend to think, again, we're just narrowly sort of unable to conceive of these things, but we think, oh wow, this is all about building these gigantic data centers, and that's where the power is going to reside. And this is why OpenAI has this $300 billion contract with Oracle, I think it was. And like these things are just like assuming that the solution is going to be the bigger the better. The big race to AGI. I just have this huge hyperscaler that's going to be control all the data, control all the compute, and that's how we're going to achieve this weird whatever utopian thing, whatever AGI is, right? Whereas, in fact, in a kind of a globally agentic world, agents are going to go everywhere, and ultimately, the compute that's going to be needed, and basically also the significant amount of communication that's going to have to go into these data centers we don't have the bandwidth capacity of an internet to funnel all those flows into central things. And so in reality, a lot of people recognize that the compute is going to have to migrate to the edge. And the ultimate edge is our phone, right? There's still, on our phones and our laptops, significant amounts of unused capacity, both in terms of storage and in compute. And yes, it's nowhere near as powerful as a NVIDIA B300 or whatever, but collectively, combined together, for inference, if not for machine learning, this is a network that will not only be capable of driving all of that, it's a network that will resist that bottlenecking problem of centralization. It'll be much more efficient because of the ability to communicate in those closer sort of geographically assigned areas. But if we design it right, where there's privacy and control over both the data and the device, you will get rewarded for contributing to it. And I actually think that the future is one in which, and by the way, there's one last thing to throw out here, because we're gonna have to jump in a sec, but like I know that we're trying to sort of get this message out to investors and your audience.
And I want to tie them into not only this upcoming event in Napa, but just in general, how they could find out about more and what kind of participation is open for them. Like how could they participate both as an attendee?
Give those details just as we close here. But just there's this concept called the intention economy that we will be surfacing at that event, February 23, the Human Authorized, the Summit on Human Agency. That event is going to have this concept called the intention economy. And you would relate to this, Chris, because we've just been talking a lot about the problems of the surveillance capitalism, manipulative surveillance model, and that has been defined as the attention economy, right? Our attention is valuable, it gets mined, and the more attention that you as an app can draw in, the more you can then sell that attention to advertisers, right? An intention economy is one in which we return back to the principles of the consumer being king. I want something. I'm going to tell the world that I want something, and come to me with your offers, world. But I'm not going to tell you who I am, so you can't manipulate me on that level. I'm not going to let you bombard me with like junk mail to try to get me to do things. But I'm going to open the door and say, if you've got a legitimate offer, I'm telling you, I want to buy a car, and I'm staking some money, right? I'm staking some tokens to show that I'm legit here. So bring me your best offers. I'm now in the bargaining seat. because I'm protected by my privacy, but I've proven that I'm a legitimate offer, and I'm going to go into this game. And that's a very different paradigm, right? Again, I think these are things that will unlock a very different economy. So I think that's a key message that you want to have.
Well, it also changes the incentives, right? And I think that's the key. And in a attention economy, we've moved into this techno-feudalistic, essentially what I call the advertising industrial complex, right? Because it's now at scale. In an intention-based economy, we move to a different incentive model where to get me to transact with you, right? You kind of have to bring your best and most compelling offer.
Good point. You can't. I mean, look about the advertising industrial complex. It basically assumes a say and spray. What's it called? Spray and hope, or spray and pray. There we go. Spray and pray idea, right? That I get enough big data information from everybody that's out there. The Chris's, the Michaels, and the Johns, and the Harrys, and all of them are giving this massive amount of attention, and they're all of a certain description of category. And let's say 1% of them is going to click on the ad, and a tiny portion of those are going to actually execute and buy the thing. But there's enough of a capability of that. Think about the massive waste that is that other 99.99% of eyeballs that don't want to have anything to do with it, right? That is if you think about that from an economics perspective, about an efficiency perspective, like, again, I like to think systems rather than just individual linear things. That is a huge measure of wasted time, wasted bandwidth, wasted everything. I mean, not to mention the fake data that's out there, right? There's this huge problem, as you probably know, of how many ads, attention.
Oh, and AI is only going to make that
bots, right? So we've got another problem that needs to be solved, which again, blockchain solutions can do, right? We've got provenance, we've got this idea of rolling this. All of this is the solutions are there. We can actually build these things. But again, if we this is what the Summit on Human Agency is about: giving people control. If you control the data, if you control the AI itself, you're the one that is, it's literally an agent on your behalf. Then you can express your intent, your intentions, or your intent, right? You can communicate that with confidence, with control. All of that in place leads to a very different economic model. And I think what's really exciting about it is that it's also how we unlock discovery. Because if you think about this from all the companies that face exactly the same problems, it's not just, I mean, we humans, we individuals have given up all our data and we've been surveilled. Lots of companies, they worry about their data. They worry about their own controls as well. They've given up an enormous amount of control to all these platforms, but they've also got huge constraints because they are bound either legally or internally by, they worry about trade secrets and competition. So there's an enormous amount of data that could be extremely valuable for the purposes of medical research or anything, more efficient supply chains or energy efficiency, you name it, that is locked up behind these company walls because of the risk of giving it out into the world. If we establish truly confidential computing models, and I don't know how well your audience is versed in ideas of confidential compute, but we're talking zero knowledge proofs and many, many decades of cryptography that's been developed that allows us to take data, and it's not just encrypting it, it's literally breaking it up and making it impossible for you to actually understand the source of it. But when you bring that together in this fragmented way, you can run compute on it and come up with answers to really important questions and not reveal the secrets that are underneath it, right? That's what,
I've always explained that concept to someone of saying, in a lot of states in America, for instance, you have to be 21 to legally enter a bar and drink alcohol. And so you go up to a door and this big burly person basically checks your ID. And on your ID is an address and a birth date and a photo and a bunch of metadata and data. The reality is the only piece of data that matters is your face and the date of your birth or the year of your birth. And so you are spilling. And then when you call your bank, right, and they go, I need to verify a couple things. What's your address? What's your this? You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know if the line's secure. You're assuming it is, but you're giving out Social Security back for. You're giving out all this stuff. The reality is it's not only more secure, but zero knowledge proof says I don't have to trust anything. I know you're over 21. I don't need to know you're 50. I don't need to know you're 43. Right. I need to know you're over 21. So it's the minimum amount of proof, to your point, that says I'm able to do a thing, whatever that thing is, based on the regulatory environment I'm in, and nothing more. And so it works not only better, faster, cheaper, but more secure. And that's what a zero knowledge proof kind of is, right? Is it don't have to know anything else because I can trust the trustless system and the ledger it's based on, and the deep fakes and all this other stuff. We're never going to be able to spot deep fakes, but we'll be able to know. Michael Casey published that if there's a identifier that's unique to him with zero knowledge proof that says he and Chris did this interview, that was real. Not some AI bot.
You know that from the cryptography. Absolutely, that's the magic of this. And the old bar analogy is always a good one, right? It's like just a binary question. Are you older than 21 or not? No other information. And that's it. But the complexity of that simple idea, expand that out into really complex computing solutions. There's so much that can be done, right? Anyway, this is all the stuff that we're going to be surfacing at this conference. We've got like some big name speakers. Jim Zemlin, who is the executive director of the Linux Foundation, is giving the keynote and explaining why he's using this kind of decentralized credential technology that's produced by something called the First Person Project, is going to be incorporated into the Linux kernel, like the most important open source technology in the world, because of the risk that that code base has faced from bots who would come in and fake, the idea that they're a developer, right? That's a huge risk to the integrity of open source. So they're looking to resolve this. We've got people like Clay Shirky, who's one of the great thinkers in terms of digital systems and society. We have Glenn Gore, who was the former chief architect of AWS and is now running a company called Affinity. And Affinity is not only a sponsor, but it's also a technology partner of ours, because people at this event are going to get an app called H2H Connect. Our company is called H2H. Obviously, that means human to human. And that H2H Connect is going to allow you to establish this sort of proof of your personhood, but also, most importantly, when you meet people, you establish a trusted relationship, a credentialed trusted relationships that you can put as much privacy around as you want, but you can show these networks of power and control and relationships around that. So this is an experimental thing that we're getting people to do, just to show that there's a different way. We have, an incredible lineup of people talking about the tech, talking about the economic implications, talking about how this all fits into this agentic AI thing. And it just feels like I'm getting so much feedback right now from people who want to be there and talk about this. They all feel this lack of control right now, that this idea that we need to establish a framework by which humans and the businesses they represent have control, have authority and control over this. It feels the right moment. So I'm excited about it. And, unfortunately, it's an invite-only event. And so, there's a bit of FOMO that's going to happen over this. But, we have limited space, but we do have the capacity for people to apply. I'm certainly interested in folks from your audience being there, anyone who can easily get to Napa on February 23rd, because as I said, I really think that people who are looking after and concerned about the future of intergenerational wealth and are looking at these through these lens, this is the sort of conversations that they should be at, but it's also the conversation that I want to be having with them. So certainly, like anyone that sort of, is from that background, they can go to the website, which is on the Linux website. If they just Google, look at that. I just used Google, as we all do, as a verb, right? If they search,
we'll put the link. We'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah,
so just click the link below in the show notes, and make sure you click the link.
We can probably round up a discount code of some sort for these guys. So
yeah, and then click to apply. Get in Michael's world. Get in his network. Get on his mailing list. Connect to him on LinkedIn. He's active there. We'll put all this stuff in the show notes. MichaelJCasey.com. We'll put that in there. Check out the book.
Yeah.
If you haven't read all of his books, at least read Our Biggest Fight with him and Frank McCourt. It's a head turner, and it's a must thinker. And now you have an event property that can hold the space and place for the conversation that really matters amongst all leaders, and especially financial advisors and high net worth families of any consequence that are trying to do right to the next generation. This is a fundamental kernel, back to your Linux conversation, of doing right by your next generation. And it's not a monetary one. This is a fundamental human rights, freedom, economic sovereignty, and all in the above. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate you as always. It's been great to reconnect, and we'll give you the final word.
Oh, all right. Yeah. Look, I mean, as Chris said, there's sort of a moral component to this, but I do want to try to say that we can have our cake and eat it too. That I think there's a lot of money to be made in this in the right way, right? And so I encourage people who really believe in the power of a truly open market, right? One that is competitive to deliver the best outcomes in terms of innovation and prosperity. To look at how we can think of a new paradigm in which we unlock that power more effectively. And I think it all, as I keep saying, rolls down into who controls the data, who controls the AI. So yeah, join us in the fight.
Awesome. Thanks everybody for tuning in to the Atomic Level. We'll see you next time.